Uh, Welcome. Today we will discuss how to write a methodology chapter that functions as a user guide so readers can evaluate your work and replicate it. That's why I have called this webinar Follow Me. Welcome, Katrina. Today's quote focuses on pointing out that although the methodology chapter is the clear description of what was done in the research study and the reasons why each decision was made, you should not approach it as a fixed set of things to do in just one way. Methodology is determined by the research problem, the purpose, and the research questions, as well as the target population. So let's see how a reflective approach to this chapter works. This is our agenda for today. First, I will present what we talk about in chapter 3 and why that's important. Then I will dissect the main elements that you have to discuss in this part of your dissertation. And finally, I will show you some common mistakes students do when writing the methodology chapter and some suggestions to avoid them. Welcome back, Adrian. So, the methodology chapter of your dissertation is the part in which you describe what you did to conduct your study. When I say this in past, is because I'm supposing that you are finishing your dissertation, but you can say also will, because some of you are beginning to travel that journey of the dissertation. So remember, despite I'll say usually in past tense, it is valid for what you have to do before presented a proposal. The methodology chapter describes the action you did to investigate the research problem and the rationale for applying specific procedures or techniques that let you gather, select, process, and analyze the information necessary to understand the problem. That's why it allows readers to critically evaluate and even replicate your study. This chapter answers two main questions. How was the data collected or generated? And how was it analyzed? The writing should be direct and precise. The clearer your writing, the easier and more valid the evaluation and replication of your work. Its importance is derived from the following points. First, readers need to know how the data was obtained because the method you chose affected the results and by extension, how you interpreted their significance in the discussion chapter of your dissertation. Methodology is crucial for any branch of a scholarship because an unreliable method produces unreliable results, and as a consequence, undermines the value of your analysis of the finding. That's why it's so important. In most cases, there are a variety of different methods you can choose to investigate a research problem, and this chapter clearly discusses the reason why you have chosen a particular procedure or technique. The reader wants to know that the data was collected or generated in a way that is consistent with accepted practice in the field of a study. For example, if you are using a multiple choice questionnaire, readers need to know that it offered your respondents a sensible and reasonable range of answers to choose from. In other words, that your questionnaire was not biased. The method must be appropriate to fulfilling the overall aims of the study. For example, you need to ensure that you have a large enough sample size to be able to generalize and make recommendations based upon the findings. Another thing is that the methodology should discuss the problems that were anticipated and the steps you took to prevent them from occurring. Information to replicate the study is particularly important when a new method has been developed or an innovative use of an existing method is applied. So that's some of the reasons why chapter 3, or the methodological chapter of your dissertation, is so important. Now, let's see the elements that you should usually include in this chapter. And these elements that are in the slide are the most common headings that you can find in the methodology chapter. As you can see, they refer to who participated in the study, how the whole study was conceived, how the information was collected and analyzed, what steps were followed, what you assume to be true, and what obstacles may have affected the study. I will deepen them in some minutes, so don't worry, I'm going to expand that for you. Generally speaking, methodology refers to a system of actions you use to do something. That's the general definition of methodology. But in research, methodology is conceived as the process you follow in order to find the information necessary to achieve the purpose of the research study, more specifically. But to fully understand the methodological aspect of research, it is necessary to talk about the concept of paradigm, which is the pattern or model of thought that includes concept, values, assumptions, practices that influence our views. The way we conceive reality determines how we view knowledge, our role in relation to it, and what action we should use to get it. That's our philosophical paradigm, or our basic image of what reality is, how we know something, and how we should find out knowledge. So methodology equals what, Evelyn? Philosophical paradigms follow to a certain extent two main trends, positivist or interpreted. The former states that there is one objective reality, and the latter that there are many truths and multiple realities. Research paradigm derives from the philosophical one and establishes the framework into which our view of the research process is inserted. In other words, it gives us the elements to conceive and interpret the research process. From the positivist philosophical paradigm, the quantitative research paradigm derives, and the qualitative one from the interpreted philosophical paradigm. Research design refers to the plan you do to conduct your research, the blueprint of how you will find out the needed information. I will deepen this concept in the next section of the webinar. And finally, research method is the most specific concept, and it refers to the techniques and strategies the researcher uses to gather and analyze data. So these four concepts are all important in order to develop a consistent and a clear study, because you start with a philosophical paradigm, in other words, how you conceive reality. And that conception of reality affects the way the kind of paradigm, the kind of research that you're going to do. And that implies that you have to choose a specific design to approach reality in the way that you conceive it. And finally, it also determines what techniques, what specific strategies you have to use. So Adrian said, so methodology equals, first, our justification for doing the research in the chosen way. 2, nature of the study, study design, etc. In other words, a detailed step-by-step description of how the study is to be conducted. Yes, dear. It is a description and also a discussion of why you make some decisions in relation to how are you going to gather and analyze that. Okay, now it's time to dissect the methodological elements that are included in chapter 3 so you can have a better picture of what you are dealing with. And let's begin with research design. Research design comprises all the elements related to the how to develop the study in a coherent and logical way in order to address the research problem effectively and achieve the established purpose. It establishes the guidelines to gather and analyze data, including the selection of population, sample, instrument, procedures, etc. In other words, is the blueprint or the user guide of your thesis or your dissertation. And these are some of the elements that are determined in the research design. Think of it as the tool that tells you what is appropriate and allowed in order to get the data you need to answer your research questions or achieve your objective. In other words, this is the framework into which you are going to move anytime that you have to choose something to do or to develop your study. Now, as a pedagogical tool, we can reduce the research paradigms to 3. The quantitative one that conceives reality as one that exists by itself and should be approached objectively. The qualitative paradigm that believes the existence of multiple realities influenced by their actors. And the mixed method one that is based on the idea that reality is too complex to be fully explained by just one paradigm, and therefore it postulates the use of the 2 basic paradigms to look for the information that explains reality more appropriately. So, as you see, these types of research design are connected to philosophical paradigms, okay? And for quantitative research design and positivist philosophical design, there is just one reality, despite of the actors that may be into it. And therefore, you have to approach that reality and study it in an objective way. While the qualitative research design that comes from the interpretative philosophical paradigm says, no, there are more than one reality, and each one of them is affected by the actors that are into it. But the mixed methods research design say, wait a minute. You cannot study a complex reality with following just one point of view. You have to combine both points of view and use them whenever you have the specific reality that you need to study, okay? So these are the main characteristics of the quantitative research design. As you can see, they are coherent to the postulates that reality exists by itself and therefore has to be approached objectively, and also that reality can be measured. Okay? The characteristics of the qualitative research design, on the other hand, show that it is based on the idea that reality is a construction of its actors, and consequently, they play an important role in it and in its knowledge. And the mixed method research design is an attempt to expand the understanding and explanation of reality based on the idea that its complexities demand as many tools as needed to apprehend it. Among the reasons to support this design, I can mention the following. Instead of a restricted set of tools to gather and analyze data, the researcher can use whatever is needed to get a better understanding of the problem. It is possible to address the quantitative research weaknesses of weak understanding of the context in which people interact and of lack of consideration of the participant voices, but also personal interpretations of researchers' possible biases and poor generalization, which are weaknesses of qualitative research, can be addressed too. And findings are derived from a wider and deeper set of data, and that makes them stronger. So any researcher can have enough research design to use them according to the problem, according to the purpose, and according to the research questions that person is following. So think of the research design as a blueprint of what you have to do in order to get valid data to answer the research question and achieve the purpose of the study. As you saw in the previous section, you have to discuss who will participate or participated in the study. That requirement takes us to what is known as population and sample. Let's begin by clarifying some concepts that you may have seen and even used many times, but that you may not be quite sure what they mean. They are research population, sample, sampling scheme, and sampling design. The first one, research population, is the least confusing since you can directly relate it to the whole set of units to which your study refers to. The other three, however, are usually misunderstood. As you can see in the definition presented in the slide, sample is the most general concept since it refers to a subset of the population that the researcher chooses to work with when it's not possible to access the whole population. An essential feature of that subset, of that sample, is that it has not only the same characteristic of the population, but also have them distributed in the same way. And because of that, it is representative of it. This is something you have to assure if you want to make generalization from the sample to the population. Sampling scheme refers to a way you can use in order to choose samples. The availability of those ways depends, as it is common in research, on the type of research questions you try to answer. Therefore, you need to have a clear picture of each one of those options so you can choose the one that lets you gather the most possible valid data. And the final concept presented in the slide is sampling design. It is, in fact, a more general concept since it refers to both sampling scheme and sample size. So when you choose a specific sampling design, it provides you a framework to both select strategy for choosing a sample and determine the most appropriate size for that sample. I'm going to present some examples of the sample schemes in just a minute. So, by means of choosing the most appropriate research design, sampling design, and data analysis method, you assure the validity of the gathered information. As you can infer, all the methodological decisions must be congruent. They have to flow in the same line of thought. For example, if your research question requires answers of a quantitative nature, then you have to choose a quantitative research design, a quantitative sampling design, and a quantitative data analysis method. Too obvious? In fact, it is, but you may be surprised by how often graduate students make decisions on those elements that do not reflect a consistent line of thought. I think that it is too obvious that many students don't see it. At first sight, probabilistic or random sampling schemes are associated to quantitative research design and non-probabilistic or non-random ones to qualitative research designs. However, you may be surprised too by the facts. Analysis of the sampling scheme used in both quantitative and qualitative study have shown that the most used sampling schemes are non-random ones, and the expected use of random scheme for quantitative studies and non-random ones for qualitative study is in fact the second most frequent occurrence. How come? Oh, perhaps because the reason for that is that random selection is not always possible in social sciences studies, which account for a great number of research studies today. Okay. Now, here you have some of the sampling schemes widely used in quantitative research. If you are interested in examples of them, I can do it at the end of the webinar, so you can have different ones, or I can read at least some of them, just one of them, so you can have an idea. Adrian says a qualitative study involves analyzing qualitative data, but qualitative data can be analyzed both qualitative and quantitatively. Is this so? That depends on what gathering tool you use to collect that data. If it is possible to make quantitative analysis of it, of that, using that specific tool. Okay? I'm going to talk about that tool in just a moment. For example, let me give you an example of simple random sampling scheme. In a medical study, the population is all hospitals that provide courses about how to eat healthy in a specific country. A simple random sample will be selected, numbering the hospital using a web or a book randomizer, or just drawing from a hat to choose n numbers of hospitals from the list, where n correspond to the size of the sample. And let me give you another example. For example, multi-stage random. This is complex. You want to know what social network European people in their 40s prefer. Since the population is too large, you decide to use the multi-stage random sampling. And you do this. First, you divide it into countries and choose some of them at random. Then divide that cluster in each of those clusters into provinces and apply randomization again to select some of them. Divide that cluster into city and choose some of them at random. And you do the same process to get a smaller cluster until the sample is sufficiently small enough for the purposes of the study. Okay, this slide and the next one present the definition of qualitative sampling schemes. Okay, let's give you an example of one here and one on the other, and at the end I can give you an example of all of them if you want. For instance, an example of convenience sampling scheme is you want to understand how people choose the type of products they buy. You stand outside the local shopping mall and ask people for data as they enter or exit. That's a convenience sampling way of gathering data. And in this one, let's see, typical case. You want to know how young engineers face the challenge of adapting to their new working environments. Instead of choosing engineers working for important private companies, you decide to work with those who work for less important public departments and private companies because they represent the norm, the typical case rather than the exceptional one. Okay? All right, so let's continue. As the slide states, the whole scope of sampling scheme is available to mixed method studies. Decision must be done taking into account the purpose of the study, the research questions, and the stages in which the study will be conducted or was conducted. For example, in a study focused on students' attitudes toward a specific strategy to teach science at elementary level, you have decided to use a mixed method approach. In the quantitative stage, a stratified random sampling has been chosen since the population is already divided into courses or strata, and the units to whom a Likert attitudinal scale will be administered are selected at random. For the qualitative stage, you select the maximum variation sampling in order to conduct an interview with the units that provide you the extreme points of view. See? That's how you can use both quantitative and qualitative sampling schemes in a mixed method research. Well, another important element of the methodology chapter is the description and discussion of the tools used to collect data. Its importance is tied to the fact that if the tool isn't appropriate to the nature of the expected data, then any finding that derives from them is not valid, and conclusions are misleading. For example, you cannot reach to valid findings about the behavior of children if the data was gathered using a questionnaire designed to be used with adults, or to collect data about the ability to write effective and coherent academic text using only a checklist of how many times students use a specific verb. Okay. That's why the selection of data collection tool is so important. This slide gives you an idea of the difference between the two main designs in relation to how collect and analyze data, the most used tool, and how data are validated. Please be aware that any tool you use to gather data must be analyzed in terms of its validity, adequacy to the participants' characteristics and research questions, and reliability when you are doing qualitative research study. So here you have a table that you can read and reflect upon it, so you can understand the differences of how to collect and how to treat data, the difference between quantitative and qualitative studies. Okay. When we talk about procedures, we refer to all the steps a researcher does in order to conduct their study. And that's why we are going to talk about this. And this is the key to describe methodological procedures. Each one of them must be described and justified so its presence can be evaluated and sometimes replicated. You need to organize procedures in a way that readers can follow easily. And now that I have to talk about common mistakes, a way to avoid those mistakes, you will see what I'm referring to. So procedure, what you did has to be described and justified, because that's the only way of knowing if you have followed the research design appropriately, okay? And that's the only way to be sure that you have reached to valid findings. So now it's time to present the most common mistakes supervisors and coaches find in the methodological chapter. These are some of them. And you have a list there, and I can tell you that the research design is not coherent with the nature of the variables involved in the problem. That's one of the most common mistakes. You choose a research design because you like it. But when readers reflect and evaluate your decision, they see that the natures of the variables involved in the problem, and that nature is not coherent to the research design that you have selected. Or the research design is appropriate, but is being implemented wrongly in terms of steps, sequence, treatment, analysis of data, etc. Or the sample is not representative of the study population, or your selection of the data is biased. Or the tools used to gather data are incomplete, biased, irrelevant, etc. Or the tools have not been evaluated in terms of the validity, adequacy to the characteristic of the population, or reliability when in case of quantitative study, and many other things. Or data is analyzed using tests or strategies that are inadequate to get valid information. Or the information is presented in a confusing way. You begin with something and then move to another thing, and then you say, oh my God, I forgot to describe this procedure. And instead of going back and doing it again, you describe that procedure out of order. Or irrelevant details are included. Too many things that are not important or necessary for understanding what you did, or that relevant data was not included. Or basic and well-known procedure are excessively explained. So you use a procedure that everybody knows what it is about, and you spend lots of time explaining it, and then you don't do the same with some new procedure or a new way of doing something. Okay? And then you say, okay, this is the kind of thing that I don't have to do, and how can I avoid them? Well, to avoid these weaknesses, you have to make explicit the relationship between the methodological elements, your decisions, and pivotal elements like the research problem, the purpose, and the research questions or objective. You have to link your methodological decisions to those elements, because what you are trying to achieve through the pivotal elements have to be possible by the selection that you do when dealing with the methodological decisions. You have to justify those decisions. I did this because of this and this and this. It's not that here you have and imagine why I choose this. Clarify how your procedures fit the selected research design. Always have to make explicit that your procedures are adequate to the research design that you selected. And if you are using new or unfamiliar methodological elements, you provide their background and rationale. You say, okay, this is a new way of doing this, and this was developed by these people or by me because of this and this and this. Okay? And organize the content in a way that can be smoothly followed. Organization is very, very important in the methodological chapter because it's your user guide. And then if you don't organize your information in a clear and smoothly followed way, you will have the same problem that has somebody who is cooking a new recipe, and the recipe is unorganized, and then you think that you have to do this first, and then you realize that that thing has to be done in 3 steps later. So at the end, the product is a mess and you cannot eat it. And if you do the same with your methodological chapter at the end, well, your chapter has to be rewritten. And also you have to provide enough information to give a clear picture of the processes and reasons behind them. But do not overwhelm readers with irrelevant details. And you say, haha, and how do I know when it is enough? When another person read your text and know exactly what you are going to do or you did. If the person is confused, review is necessary. So, in summary, the methodological chapter is the user guide you provide readers to understand, evaluate, and perhaps replicate what you have done. It has a pragmatic but reflective nature, and therefore you have to use a direct and supported approach to write it. Imagine you are telling readers, hey guys, this is what I've done, and I invite you to follow and check my way of developing my study. Think of that. Okay? These are the references that I have used today. And this is the good thing. Oh, these are the good things that come by mail to you from Doctoral Net. Okay? So now, if you want to answer question, make comments, ask for anything, please do it and use the chat box. No questions? No comments? No demands? Or too much information to reflect upon right now? That could be another possibility. Just let me know. No? No questions or demands on the sampling schemes? Not at all. Positionality. Let me see where I have that. Did I mention that? What do you refer to when you say positionality? I mean, do you refer it as a methodological idea, or do you refer it as a sampling scheme, or do you refer it as philosophical paradigm thing related to? Welcome, Judy. When you write it up, chapter 3, how you address your stance as a researcher. Well, that depends on, first of all, depends on the paradigm that you are using. If it is a quantitative paradigm, then you are expected to address your stance in a very objective way, because remember that for a positivist philosophical paradigm from which research, quantitative research design derive, there is just one reality, and that reality exists despite of any actor. So you cannot have biases, you cannot have experiences. So what you have to look for is to justify the consistency and coherence of the position, okay? Rather than if you like it or if you think it's important or not. You have to work with the elements that let you justify how coherent and how consistent your decision is in terms of, in relation to what you are doing. So your reasons and your justification does not include your biases or your position as an actor in the research, but you has to abstract yourself and say, look, this decision is coherent to the fact that these results have been obtained in this study. This decision is coherent to the fact that this theorist or this theory has said this and this and this and this, okay? While when you are doing a qualitative research or the qualitative stage of a mixed method research, you have to say, I got this and I think this because of this. I mean, you can talk about your experiences, you can talk even about your biases, but you have to say that those are your experiences and those are your biases. So you have to define yourself as an actor of the context in which you made your study. Okay, so at the end, your discussion within a quantitative study is objective. You as a person are out of that concept, and you rely only on the consistency and the coherence of what you are doing and what has been done before. While when you are in the qualitative skill design, you have to explicitly say what are your points of view, what are your biases, and what are your experiences, so readers can say, okay, she got this, but it is influenced by this that are their experiences and her ideas. Okay, Adrian said, it occurs to me that some published research articles do not give a crystal clear description of how the studies were conducted. And sometimes that's made on purpose. For example, I was looking up research studies that employ qualitative comparative analysis, but then very few research articles actually explain how that is done in an easy-to-follow manner, such as replication is possible. Because in that case, replication is not possible in the exactly same context, in the exactly same way. It can be used as a general guide to what you want to do. But remember that one important thing, let me look here. One important thing of research, qualitative research, is that the data is got from a few participants and a few research sites. And that makes that using validity procedure that relied on the participant, the researchers, or the reader, and larger patterns or generalizations, you have to look for the whole data. Okay, so that's why. And sometimes, especially when big actors want to influence your behavior through results of research study, they omit some elements of the methodology that they follow, the procedures that they follow, in order so you cannot have the whole information to evaluate what they have done. And when you really get that information, you see, wait a minute, how can this finding can be generalized from this data or something like that? And it says, in response to Adrian, I have observed similar instances in physics and engineering articles. That's the point, dears. You are being reflective readers. And that's very important because you are checking that there are gaps of information, or there are misunderstandings that are not being explained, but then findings are concluded from what they have done that is not really well done. And Algen says, right, I suspect that some researchers want to publish but are reluctant to share the methodology with others. Yes, and we can wonder if it is because they consider that methodology is so awesome that only they can use it, or because they have seen that there are faults in that methodology that if you evaluated them, you will say, this is rubbish. Sorry if I'm not too academic in that expression, but I think is part of reality, in fact. Okay. Any other question or any other suggestion or any other demand? Well, let me stop the recording and then we can continue if you think that you may have another things to talk about. Just let me stop the recording, but first I want to thank all the people who registered for this webinar, and especially to all of the attendees today. And I want to invite you all to the next webinar, which will be on March the 12th. It will be about chapter 4, that is titled, Look What I've Got. And then on March the 25th, I will present chapter 5, which is called Selling Work and Showing Off. Then on April the 9th, we'll go back to argumentation. And this time we are talking specifically about dialectical or Rogerian argumentation, how to do it. And then on April the 23rd, I'm going to talk about analytical or two-lemenian argumentation, how to do it. So you are all invited to those things, and I hope you have found this webinar useful.